They did not invite Amelia Hart to the gala because they missed her. They invited her because humiliation looked better under chandeliers. The ballroom of the Caldwell Meridian Foundation glittered 40 floors above downtown Chicago, all marble floors, white roses, champagne glasses, and men in black tuxedos laughing softly, as if money itself had taught them restraint. Amelia arrived at exactly 7 o'clock in a simple black dress, her hair pinned low, her coat folded over one arm, her face calm enough to make strangers assume she had never been broken in public before. At the registration table, a young woman checked the guest list, smiled too quickly, and handed her a cream-colored place card. Amelia looked down. The name printed in gold was not Amelia Hart. It was former Mrs. Caldwell. For one quiet second, the noise of the room thinned. The string quartet kept playing near the staircase. Silverware touched porcelain. Cameras flashed near the sponsor wall. Amelia's thumb moved once across the edge of the card, feeling the raised letters as if they were a scar someone had decided to decorate. Across the ballroom, Ethan Caldwell saw it happen. He stood beside Vanessa Reed beneath a curtain of warm light, smiling for photographers, one hand resting at Vanessa's waist with the practiced ease of a man who believed every room belonged to him. His eyes found Amelia's, and for a moment, the old life stood between them like a locked door. Unpaid bills on a kitchen counter, rain against a one-bedroom apartment window, his voice saying someday, Amelia, someday they'll know my name. Then he looked at the place card in her hand and did nothing. Vanessa noticed too. Her smile widened, polished and delicate, the kind of smile that never raised its voice because it had always had other people to do the cutting. She crossed the room slowly, her ivory gown whispering against the floor. Amelia, she said, warm enough for witnesses. I'm so glad you came. We weren't sure you would feel comfortable. Amelia folded the place card once between her fingers, not enough to damage it, just enough to make the paper remember her touch. It's a beautiful event, she said. Vanessa tilted her head toward the far corner, where a small round table sat near the service doors. Waiters moved in and out behind it carrying trays, and every few seconds, the kitchen lights spilled across the carpet like an interruption. Your seat is over there, Vanessa said. We wanted everyone placed where they'd feel most familiar. The women nearby heard it. One covered a laugh with her champagne flute. Another glanced at Amelia's left hand, bare now except for a thin gold band she wore on her middle finger, not a wedding ring, not a promise, only a boundary. Ethan stepped onto the stage before Amelia could move. The microphone gave a soft pop. The room turned toward him like flowers turning toward sun. Tonight, he said, is about growth. About leaving behind the people and circumstances that kept us small. A ripple of approval passed through the room. Vanessa looked back at Amelia. Amelia did not lower her eyes. She walked to the table by the kitchen doors, sat beneath the wrong name, placed her purse beside her chair, and rested one hand over the silver pin hidden inside it. The night had just begun, and Ethan still believed silence meant defeat. Ethan Caldwell had always known how to make a room believe him. He stood beneath the amber light with one hand on the podium, his cuff links catching the glow like small pieces of polished ice, and spoke about vision, resilience, and the future of Caldwell Meridian, as if every word had been carved from marble. Amelia sat near the service doors with the wrong place card beside her plate, listening to the faint swing of the kitchen door behind her, the soft rush of air each time a waiter passed with silver trays. No one at her table asked if she was comfortable. No one had to. Discomfort was the point. Across the room, Vanessa stood near the stage, her hand folded neatly over her champagne glass, watching Amelia with the delicate interest of someone admiring a crack in expensive china. Ethan lifted his glass. I want to thank the woman who taught me what real ambition looks like, he said, turning toward Vanessa. The ballroom smiled before he even finished. Some people share your past, but the right woman builds your future. Applause rose quickly, bright and obedient. Amelia looked down at her water glass, where the chandelier had broken itself into trembling rings of light. For 10 years, she had known the pauses in Ethan's voice better than anyone. She knew when he was nervous. She knew when he was charming. She knew when he was lying to himself so beautifully that even he started to believe it. The man on that stage had once fallen asleep at a kitchen table in a $200 thrift store suit, while Amelia stayed awake beside him, sorting invoices, overdue notices, and loan documents into 3 uneven piles. Pay now. Pay later. Pray. Back then, ambition had smelled like burnt coffee and printer ink. It had looked like Ethan rubbing his eyes at 2 in the morning, saying, "One day, Amelia, this will all be worth it." She had believed him, not because he was certain, but because she had carried enough certainty for both of them. A woman 2 seats away leaned toward her friend and whispered, not softly enough, "She must feel so strange being here. Imagine watching him upgrade in real time." Her friend laughed into her napkin. Amelia kept her hands still in her lap. She did not turn. She did not defend the years no one had seen. She did not explain that the first Caldwell account had survived because she had negotiated payment extensions while Ethan practiced investor pitches in the bathroom mirror. She did not explain that the company logo glowing on the wall had been sketched on the back of a grocery receipt while they ate canned soup in an apartment that lost heat every winter. Explanations had a way of sounding small in rooms built to misunderstand them. Ethan continued, his voice warming with confidence. Tonight is not just a celebration. It is proof that when you surround yourself with the right people, you become who you were always meant to be. Vanessa stepped onto the stage, and the applause grew louder. She kissed his cheek, careful and public, then turned toward the ballroom with a smile that sparkled harder than her necklace. "And we are grateful," she said, "even for the chapters that taught Ethan what he deserved to leave behind." A few heads turned. Toward Amelia. Not all at once. That would have been too honest. They turned in small, polite pieces, like people pretending not to watch a glass slip from a table. Amelia felt the old ache move through her, not sharp anymore, only familiar, like a song playing from another room. She picked up the place card again and set it upright beside her plate, letting the gold letters face the ballroom. Former Mrs. Caldwell. If that was the role they wanted her to play, she would let them look at it a little longer. Then she reached into her purse and touched the smooth barrel of the silver pen. It was still there, cold, waiting. Ethan raised his glass one final time. "To new beginnings," he said. Amelia lifted her water, not to him, not to Vanessa, but to the woman she had been before she learned that silence could become a language powerful people feared. The applause faded into the soft scrape of chairs and the delicate clink of forks against china, but Amelia remained still, her water glass untouched in front of her. She could feel the ballroom rewriting her life in real time, turning 10 years of work into a footnote, 10 years of loyalty into a weakness, 10 years of sacrifice into something Ethan had survived instead of something he had stood on. It was strange how easily rich rooms accepted clean lies. Give them candlelight, a polished voice, and a woman sitting quietly in the corner, and they would believe almost anything. Ethan came down from the stage to accept handshakes, each one firmer than the last, each smile wider, as if applause had fed him something he had been starving for. Vanessa stayed close beside him, glowing beneath the chandeliers, accepting compliments as if she had built the company herself brick by brick, invoice by invoice, sleepless night by sleepless night. Amelia watched them from the far table and remembered the first version of Caldwell Meridian, before it had glass offices, before it had private elevators, before anyone said the name with respect. It had been a folding desk in a 700-square-foot apartment on the west side, a second-hand laptop that overheated every afternoon, and a stack of bills Amelia sorted by due date. Because hope was not a payment plan, Ethan used to pace between the kitchen and the window, practicing pitches to investors who never called back. Amelia would sit cross-legged on the floor with a calculator, building budgets out of numbers that barely touched. When he panicked, she steadied him. When clients delayed payment, she called them with a voice so calm they agreed to terms they had refused him. When the first bank rejected him, she found another. When the second bank asked for collateral, she signed papers with her maiden name and did not tell her father how frightened she was. Back then, Ethan had kissed the top of her head and called her his anchor. Years later, in rooms like this, he called her dead weight. A waiter placed a small salad in front of Amelia and hesitated when he saw the name card. He knew, not the whole story, but enough. His eyes flicked from the gold letters to her face with a brief, human apology. He was too professional to speak. Amelia gave him a small nod, and he moved on. At the table beside hers, 2 men in navy suits were discussing the merger, careless because they assumed she was nobody important. Caldwell is lucky the recovery fund came in, one said. Without that capital, the board would have buried him by Monday. The other lowered his voice, but not enough. Nobody knows who controls Hartwell Recovery Partners. Some East Coast money, probably. Amelia cut a cherry tomato in half with slow precision. Hartwell, her mother's maiden name. The name Ethan had once said sounded too ordinary for the world he wanted. Near the stage, Ethan laughed at something Vanessa whispered and looked briefly toward Amelia, perhaps to see if she was wounded enough yet. She held his gaze, not coldly, not warmly, just steadily. For the first time that evening, his smile thinned. He could not have named what changed. Nothing had, really. She was still at the worst table, still under the wrong name, still silent beneath the chandeliers. But silence had weight when it was carrying the truth, and Amelia had carried it long enough. Amelia had stopped explaining herself 2 years earlier, on a Thursday morning in a county courthouse that smelled faintly of floor polish, raincoats, and old paper. Ethan had arrived with a lawyer who spoke in polished sentences and a folder thick enough to make the truth look negotiable. Amelia had arrived with one purse, one coat, and a silence everyone mistook for surrender. The judge asked if the marriage was irretrievably broken, and Ethan answered first. His voice did not shake. He said they had grown apart, that their values no longer aligned, that he needed a partner who understood the scale of his ambitions. Amelia looked at the table between them and remembered washing coffee stains from his only good shirt before his first investor meeting. She remembered driving 40 miles through snow because he had forgotten presentation documents at home. She remembered sitting alone in emergency rooms with his mother, signing forms while he closed deals 3 states away. None of that belonged in court. Not because it was not true, but because truth loses its shape when it has to beg to be believed. After the divorce, people asked why she had not fought harder. Her neighbor asked it over the mailbox. Her cousin asked it at Thanksgiving. Even an old friend from Ethan's office had touched her arm in a grocery store and said, "You should tell your side before everyone decides for you." Amelia had smiled then, standing beneath fluorescent lights with a carton of eggs in one hand, and realized how tired she was of turning pain into presentations for people who had already chosen their seats. So she stopped. She moved into a 1-bedroom apartment on the north side of Chicago, 12 floors up, where the windows faced a brick wall and the radiator knocked at midnight like an impatient visitor. She bought a small desk, a used espresso machine, and 3 black notebooks. Every morning before sunrise, she walked 1 mile to a coffee shop with fogged windows and took the corner table near the outlet. While the city woke up around her, Amelia studied distressed assets, debt structures, shareholder rights, voting agreements, and the quiet machinery behind companies that looked powerful from the outside but were hollowing out behind closed doors. She learned that men like Ethan loved stages, but stages were rarely where power lived. Power lived in clauses, in signatures, in the fine print no one read until it was too late. The first time she bought a small position in a failing logistics company, her hands trembled over the keyboard. Not from fear, exactly, but from recognition. She had spent a decade saving one man's dream in secret. Now she could save companies for herself, or choose not to save them at all. Month by month, the notebooks filled. Hartwell Recovery Partners began as a name on a filing document, then a bank account, then a quiet fund with quiet investors who liked that Amelia spoke less than everyone else in the room and understood more than they expected. She did not chase revenge. Revenge was loud, hungry, and careless. Amelia chased leverage. Leverage waited. Leverage watched. Leverage signed at the exact right moment. Back in the ballroom, Ethan turned away first, as if her steady gaze had become a question he did not want to answer. Vanessa touched his sleeve, smiling for another photograph. Amelia looked down at the wrong name card one last time, then slid it beneath her plate. They had invited the woman they thought he had left behind. They had no idea she had already entered the building as the person who could decide what happened next. By the time dessert arrived, the gala had begun to change shape beneath its own music. The chandeliers still glowed. The donors still smiled. The photographers still moved between tables asking couples to lean closer, but Amelia could feel the tension under the carpet, thin and electrical, the way air feels before a summer storm rolls across Lake Michigan. It was not in the speeches. It was in the corners. It was in the board members gathered near the hallway, their voices low, their smiles disappearing whenever they thought no one important was watching. Richard Sloan, the chairman of Caldwell Meridian, stood with two senior partners near a marble column, one hand wrapped around a glass he had not tasted. He looked toward Ethan, then toward the closed double doors leading to the private conference suite, and his jaw tightened. Amelia knew that look. She had seen it on founders, executives, and heirs who had spent years confusing expensive rooms with stable ground. Caldwell Meridian was not celebrating a victory tonight. It was trying to hide a collapse under white roses and soft jazz. 6 months earlier, the company had missed a major deadline on a real estate development outside Naperville. Then 2 regional lenders had tightened their terms. Then a private investor from New York had walked away less than 48 hours before closing. By the time Ethan began telling magazines about his next chapter, Caldwell Meridian had already been quietly selling pieces of itself to survive the current one. Hartwell Recovery Partners had entered through the back door, politely, legally, invisibly. At first, Amelia had not known Ethan was still tied to the company so tightly. She had only seen numbers, debt schedules, delayed payments, property liens, and leadership notes that sounded confident until placed beside the balance sheet. Then his name appeared in the internal documents. Ethan Caldwell, proposed managing partner after merger completion. Ethan Caldwell, compensation package pending board approval. Ethan Caldwell, public face of expansion strategy. Amelia had sat alone in her office that night. The Chicago skyline blurred against the windows, and stared at his name until it became only ink. Not husband, not betrayal, not memory, just risk. And risk had to be managed. At the gala, Ethan had no idea how close he was standing to the edge of the life he had been displaying. He moved through the room with Vanessa beside him, accepting praise for a deal that had not closed, for a future that had not been secured, for authority he did not yet legally possess. Vanessa seemed even more certain. She laughed with donors, touched arms, promised influence, and spoke about the foundation as if generosity were another form of ownership. When she passed Amelia's table again, she slowed just enough to let the insult feel accidental. "I hope the evening is not too overwhelming," she said. "These rooms can be difficult when you are not used to them anymore." Amelia placed her dessert spoon beside the plate with careful quiet. "Rooms are simple," she said. "It is the paperwork behind them that matters." Vanessa's smile paused, only for a fraction of a second, then returned brighter than before. "How practical," she said, and drifted away. Amelia watched her go, then looked toward the private hallway where Richard Sloan had just disappeared with 2 attorneys. A text lit up her phone beneath the table. It was from Marcus Vale. "The board has moved the vote forward. They are afraid the lenders will leave before midnight." Amelia read it once, then locked the screen. Around her, laughter rose again, polished and weightless. Ethan was preparing for another speech. Vanessa was adjusting the angle of her diamond bracelet for a camera. The wrong name card remained hidden beneath Amelia's plate, pressed flat by porcelain. In her purse, the silver pin waited beside a folded copy of the voting agreement, and for the first time that night, Amelia allowed herself the smallest breath of relief. They had mistaken her silence for absence. They had not understood that she had been present in every document that mattered. Amelia left the table without making the chair scrape. That was one of the first things she had learned after the divorce, how to remove herself from a room without asking permission from the heir. She walked past the white roses, past the sponsor wall, past the photographer calling for one more smile from Ethan and Vanessa beneath the golden Caldwell Meridian logo. No one stopped her. That was the privilege of being underestimated. People looked through her and called it class. In the hallway outside the ballroom, the music softened behind the heavy doors until it became only a pulse through wood. The marble floor reflected her black dress in long, quiet lines. At the end of the corridor, near a window overlooking the Chicago River, Marcus Vale stood with a leather folder under one arm and his phone in his hand. He was in his early 50s, gray at the temples, careful in the way men become when they have spent years watching careless people ruin excellent documents. When he saw Amelia, he did not smile. He only lowered his voice. "They moved the vote forward," he said. "Richard Sloan is trying to keep the lenders from walking before midnight. The board is ready to accept Hartwell terms, but they want you in the room." Amelia looked through the glass wall beside them. Inside the ballroom, Ethan was laughing with a donor from Dallas, one hand in his pocket, posture loose, confident, almost boyish. Vanessa leaned against his shoulder for a photo, her diamond bracelet catching the camera flash. For a moment, they looked exactly like the version of the future Ethan had once promised Amelia, only with Amelia erased from the frame. "Does Ethan know?" she asked. Marcus followed her gaze. "He knows there is a controlling investor. He does not know it is you." The words did not thrill her. They settled instead, heavy and clean. Amelia opened her purse and took out the silver pen. Its surface had dulled slightly over the years, worn at the clip where her thumb often rested. Ethan had given it to her on their 3rd anniversary, back when dinner at a neighborhood steakhouse felt extravagant and they still counted every dollar before ordering dessert. He had placed it across the table with a shy pride she almost hated remembering. "One day, you will sign something important with this," he had said. She had laughed then, because back then important things seemed to belong to other people. People with lakefront houses and corner offices and names printed correctly on invitations. She turned the pin once between her fingers. "He forgot this existed," she said. Marcus glanced at it. Most people forget the tools that built them. From inside the ballroom came another wave of applause. Ethan had returned to the microphone. His voice traveled faintly into the hall, warm and polished. "In a few minutes, we will take the final step into the future of Caldwell Meridian." Amelia watched him raise his glass as if the future had already agreed to belong to him. Richard Sloane appeared at the conference suite doors, pale beneath his tan, motioning urgently for Marcus. Behind him, 2 attorneys waited beside a long table covered in binders, signature tabs, and untouched coffee. The room looked nothing like revenge. No red carpet, no spotlight, no music, just contracts, tired executives, and the kind of silence that comes before ownership changes hands. Amelia slid the pen back into her purse, but kept her fingers around it. "Let them finish clapping," she said. "Then we will give them something real to hear." Marcus opened the conference door for her. Before she stepped inside, Amelia looked once more toward the ballroom. Ethan was smiling under the chandeliers, still believing the night had been designed to celebrate him. He did not know that the most important signature in the building was waiting in the purse of the woman seated by the kitchen doors. Inside the conference suite, the air was colder than the ballroom, and no one pretended otherwise. The long table was covered with black binders, yellow signature tabs, half-empty coffee cups, and the tired faces of people who had spent all evening smiling while the floor disappeared beneath them. Richard Sloane stood at the head of the table with both palms pressed flat against the polished wood, his wedding ring tapping once as he tried to steady his hand. 2 attorneys looked up when Amelia entered, and for a moment their surprise was so complete it became almost impolite. They had expected a representative from Hartwell Recovery Partners. They had not expected the quiet woman who had been seated near the kitchen doors under a name that was not hers. Marcus placed the leather folder on the table and opened it without ceremony. "Ms. Hart is the controlling signatory," he said. The title landed softly, but it changed every face in the room. One attorney glanced toward Richard. Richard swallowed. "Ms. Hart," he said, finding respect too late, but wisely finding it. "We appreciate your willingness to proceed tonight." Amelia did not sit. She looked at the documents first, not at the people. That had become her habit. People dressed their fear in expensive fabric. Paper told the truth. The revised merger agreement. The emergency capital injection. The voting control transfer. The removal clause for executive appointments tied to undisclosed conflicts. Ethan's name appeared on the page in neat black letters, not as a man, not as a memory, but as a liability category. Amelia read the line once, then twice. Her face did not change. In the ballroom beyond the wall, the microphone carried Ethan's voice faintly through the corridor. He was still talking about destiny. The contrast was almost beautiful. Marcus leaned close enough that only she could hear him. "Once the board announces this, he cannot stop it. But they are asking whether you want the statement made privately." Amelia looked toward the closed doors. Beyond them were the chandeliers, the donors, the cameras, the wrong name card beneath her plate, and Ethan smiling as if her silence had been an accessory to his triumph. "No," she said. "They made the story public. The correction can be public too." Richard closed his eyes for half a second, the way a man does when he knows the expensive answer is still the only answer. Then he nodded to the attorneys. They began gathering the documents. Amelia turned and walked back toward the ballroom with Marcus a step behind her. the silver pin now resting in her hand, hidden against the side of her purse. When the doors opened, warmth and applause spilled into the hallway. Ethan was on stage again, Vanessa beside him, both framed by the Caldwell Meridian logo glowing 30 feet wide against the screen. And before we close this beautiful evening, Vanessa said into the microphone, her voice sweet enough to frost glass, I think it would be meaningful to hear from someone who supported Ethan long ago. Amelia, would you join us for a few words? The room turned. A few people smiled with the lazy cruelty of those expecting discomfort to entertain them. Ethan did not stop her. He only looked down from the stage with that familiar expression, half pity, half pride, waiting for her to shrink beneath the attention. Amelia placed her purse on the chair, took the silver pin in her right hand, and stood. The walk from the back table to the stage felt longer than 40 feet. Every step quieted something. The glasses, the whispers, the soft music. Vanessa held out the microphone as if offering kindness. Amelia took it, looked across the ballroom, then turned her eyes to Ethan. No speech, she said, her voice calm, clear, and impossible to interrupt. Just business. Behind her, Marcus stepped onto the stage with the leather folder, and for the first time that night, Ethan looked at the documents before he looked at her. For 1 second, no one understood what Amelia meant. The room had been prepared for embarrassment, not procedure. Vanessa still held her smile in place, but it had become stiff at the edges, like a portrait hanging slightly crooked. Ethan looked from Amelia to Marcus, then to the leather folder, and the confidence in his face began to thin in small, visible layers. Marcus placed the documents on the podium beneath the microphone. The sound was modest, just paper against wood, but it moved through the ballroom more sharply than applause. Richard Sloane walked onto the stage behind him, his expression pale and formal, a chairman no longer protected by chandeliers. Ladies and gentlemen, Richard said, clearing his throat, there has been a necessary adjustment to tonight's merger proceedings. A murmur passed across the tables. Vanessa turned toward him, her voice still sweet but quieter now. Richard, perhaps this should be handled after the program. Richard did not look at her. That was the first sign that the room had changed owners. Marcus opened the folder to the final agreement and spoke with the calm precision of someone who did not need volume to command attention. Hartwell Recovery Partners has completed its emergency capital position in Caldwell Meridian Group. Under the revised terms approved by the board, voting control transfers upon execution by the controlling signatory. Ethan gave a short laugh, almost polite, almost confused. And who exactly is that? Marcus turned the page. Richard's eyes lowered. The attorneys near the stage stopped moving. Amelia felt the silver pin resting between her fingers, cool and familiar, a small piece of the past finally arriving at the right address. Marcus looked into the room. Amelia Hart. The name did not echo, but it seemed to remove the air from every table it touched. Someone dropped a fork against a plate. The photographer slowly lowered his camera. Vanessa's mouth opened slightly, then closed again without sound. Ethan stared at Amelia as if she had stepped out of a life he had buried and brought the deed with her. That is not possible, he said, but his voice had lost the smooth finish that had carried him all night. Amelia did not answer him. She looked down at the agreement. There was his name, attached to a clause delaying his executive appointment pending review of undisclosed conflicts and financial exposure. There was Vanessa's foundation contract, frozen until independent audit clearance. There was Caldwell Meridian, no longer an empire being handed to Ethan, but a damaged structure being transferred to the person who knew where the cracks had always been. Richard stepped aside. Marcus placed a small blue tab beneath the signature line. Amelia removed the cap from the pen. The tiny click sounded impossibly loud. 10 years ago, Ethan had bought that pen for her with money they should have used for groceries, grinning across a cheap steakhouse table, telling her she would sign something important someday. He had remembered the dream only when it belonged to him. Amelia remembered everything. She signed slowly, not dramatically, not angrily, just her first name, then her last, each letter steady enough to make the whole ballroom hold its breath. When she finished, Marcus took the page, reviewed it, and nodded once to Richard. Voting control is transferred, he said. The screen behind Ethan changed before anyone spoke. His name disappeared from the proposed leadership slide. Hartwell Recovery Partners appeared in its place. Vanessa reached for Ethan's arm, but he did not move. Amelia capped the pen, set the microphone back into its stand, and looked at the room that had laughed at the wrong name card. No one was laughing now. The silence after Amelia signed was not empty. It was crowded with every word Ethan had spent years teaching people to believe. It moved across the ballroom slowly, touching the donors, the board members, the women who had laughed behind champagne glasses, the men who had mistaken her quiet for irrelevance. On the screen, Hartwell Recovery Partners glowed where Ethan's name had been only moments earlier, clean white letters against a blue background, too simple to argue with. Richard Sloan adjusted his tie and began explaining the transition in careful corporate language, but Amelia no longer needed to listen. The important part had already happened. The room had heard the paper speak. Vanessa stood beside the podium, one hand still hovering near Ethan's sleeve, her diamond bracelet suddenly looking like something borrowed from a story that had changed without asking her permission. "There must be some mistake," she said, but no one answered her. Not Richard. Not Marcus. Not the attorneys. Mistakes had emotion in them. This was documentation. Ethan stepped toward Amelia, lowering his voice as if privacy could be rebuilt after public cruelty. "Amelia," he said, and for the first time that night, he said her name correctly. Not former wife. Not past. Not chapter. Amelia looked at him with the same calm she had carried at the back table. It was not anger that made her face unreadable. It was distance. "You could have told me," he said. A small sound moved through the room. Not laughter, not sympathy. Only the discomfort of people hearing a man arrive late to the truth. Amelia glanced once toward the table near the service doors. The wrong name card was still there, partly hidden beneath the plate, its gold letters pressed flat by porcelain. She thought of the young woman at registration who had handed it to her, of Vanessa's smile, of Ethan seeing it and choosing silence because he thought silence belonged only to her. Amelia walked back down the steps from the stage. The crowd parted without being asked. No one touched her arm. No one offered congratulations. Respect arrived carefully when it arrived too late. At her table, she lifted the place card, smoothed the crease with one thumb, and carried it to Ethan. "This was yours," she said softly. "Not mine." She placed it on the podium beside the signed agreement. Ethan stared at the card as if it weighed more than the contract. Vanessa looked away. Marcus closed the folder. Richard turned toward the board. The machinery of consequence had begun without needing Amelia to raise her voice. She slipped the silver pin back into her purse and walked toward the ballroom doors. Behind her, the music did not start again. The chandeliers still shone, the white roses still stood in perfect arrangements, but the celebration had lost its script. In the hallway, the air felt cooler, cleaner. Ethan followed her only as far as the threshold. "Did any of it matter to you?" he asked. Amelia stopped beneath the warm lobby lights, her reflection faint in the marble wall. For a moment, she saw the younger woman she had been, carrying bills, hope, and a man who thought love meant endless forgiveness. Then she saw herself now, standing alone and whole. "It mattered," she said. "That is why I stopped letting you spend it." Outside, Chicago glittered along the river, all glass and headlights and late-night wind. A black car waited at the curb. Amelia stepped into the city without looking back. She did not win him back. She won herself.